It's a really dangerous game to try to kind of classify people into the sort of good and bad categories because, there will be a couple who have made their money through legitimate means, and most of them made their money, their fortune, through the breakup of the Soviet Union and the privatization of these very sizable state assets. But the key point here is that you really have to introduce very rigorous regimes in the UK. So you need to be able to identify, well, where did this money come from? Who is the person who owns this property or who owns this large pool of money? And how are they connected to sort of corruption or to the Putin regime? And at the moment, those questions aren't really being asked in a serious way. And until you do that, you really can't make any headway.
The Times journalist Edward Lucas has described the tide of dirty money sloshes through the streets of London when referring to the West's failure to stand up for the people of Ukraine. And there is alarm at how much Russian dirty money is entrenched in London, with a recent report finding a thread between the Conservative Party and Russian businesses. A Labour Party calculation put the money donated to the Tory party at 1.93 million. And Ian Blackford, the SNP's Westminster leader, said 2.3 million was raised from Russian oligarchs. Further, British high street banks processed nearly £548 million from a money laundering operation run by Russian criminals with ties to Putin's government. Revelations of such contact with Russian money surfacing. How do we, as a country, untangle ourselves from it? Franz Wild is editor at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. Franz, are you surprised that we're only starting to ask these questions now?
Yes, I'm very surprised. I mean, this is absolutely not a new issue. We've known for a long time that this is a major threat. I mean, a couple of years ago, the Parliament's Intelligence and Security Committee actually said the flood of dirty money from Russia that's directly connected with the Kremlin and Putin is a national security threat. So it's slightly baffling that, the people in charge are actually only sort of talking about it seriously now. I mean, I just hasten to add, they've been talking about it for a while, but they always kind of say, well, we'll deal with this when sort of parliamentary time allows. And obviously, that's basically just sort of kicking it down the line. And you kind of have to think, well, when will it become a priority? And even now, the last time Boris Johnson talked about kind of implementing measures that would limit this kind of thing, he said it would be next parliamentary session, which obviously, again, is not suggesting that it's a big priority.
Franz, can you answer something for me, perhaps? I mean, Boris Johnson announced that he imposed sanctions on three billionaire oligarchs. And there seems to be debate about, good oligarchs and bad oligarchs who are friends of Putin's and oligarchs who aren't. But isn't it the general assumption that anyone who has reached oligarchical status has been a friend of Putin's at some time, because that's the only way to make those extraordinary amounts of money?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really dangerous game to try to kind of classify people into the sort of good and bad categories because, there will be a couple who have made their money through legitimate means, and most of them made their money, their fortune, through the breakup of the Soviet Union and the privatization of these very sizable state assets. But the key point here is that you really have to introduce very rigorous regimes in the UK. So you need to be able to identify, well, where did this money come from? Who is the person who owns this property or who owns this large pool of money? And how are they connected to sort of corruption or to the Putin regime? And at the moment, those questions aren't really being asked in a serious way. And until you do that, you really can't make any headway.
Do you think that there is the will to root out all of this Russian money entrenched in our society, or is the economic cost for us discouraging?
I mean, I think the thing that you read out in the introduction about the links between the Conservative Party and Russian donors, by the way, it's not only Russian donors, it's British financiers, it's Middle Eastern donors, it's from all over. but there is a very large contingent of very wealthy Russian donors, and that kind of tells a story, because why would they bite the hand that feeds them? So I don't know if there is the will. There's a lot of bold talk. We haven't actually seen any follow through at all, and there are some very specific measures that are on the table that everyone knows about. And that are very easily achievable. And even once those things have been introduced, it'll still take a few years to kind of filter through the system for them to actually be effective.
I mean, people are in a state of shock about what's happened today, but there are so many institutions, arts institutions, businesses, and so on, that have very obvious Russian money, rooms called after Russian oligarchs and so on. Do you think that it's going to get to a point where they're going to become the sort of Sacklers of today?
I think that's very possible. I mean, if you look at how a lot of former Western European leaders and ministers have been leaving the boards of Russian companies today in the wake of the invasion, that's pretty striking. It's very rapidly not becoming very fashionable to be associated in any way with the Russian regime or the Russian elite. That's going to come through here as well. I have to say, the Russian sanctions regime has been very thin so far. I mean, a handful of names of individuals, a handful of banks. It's been nothing in comparison to what the EU has announced, to what the US has announced. And obviously, Boris Johnson and Liz Truss have promised something much, much stronger. I'm slightly surprised that they've waited so long, because you can't imagine that a Russian president who's kind of in full-on battle mode is at this stage thinking about individual sanctions. In order for that to work as a possible threat, as a deterrence, they needed to get onto that a lot faster and a lot sooner, and they didn't do that.
Will Putin not also have anticipated economic sanctions? I mean, you'd imagine that would be very much top on his list of shall I, shan't I?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we know that for a while he's built up his economic arsenal as well as his military arsenal. He's built up foreign reserves. He's made himself as insulated as possible against sanctions so that he can keep his military machine and his loyalty base running for several months. And his calculation must be that, he can achieve whatever military aims he has within a fairly short period of time, and that he can then ride things out. I mean, I think, most informed people suggest that he's still miscalculating, but he's in a very strong position financially at the moment. One thing to point out is that there are sort of different layers, aren't there? There's the Russian state, so sanctions against Russian credit, sanctions against potentially Russian oil or natural gas. And then there's sanctions against Russian oligarchs, and they're slightly separate things, and they'll have a different effect on Russia. But at this stage, unfortunately, the game has tipped into the military sphere, which doesn't mean that the economic sphere is totally irrelevant, but it certainly means that it's not quite as pressing.
And in terms of immediate impact, what needs to happen now?
So two things. I mean, I don't profess to be a sort of military expert by any means.
No, I'm not asking you about militarily, but in terms of the sloshing of Russian money.
Yeah. I mean, at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, what we're looking into is what are the flows of dirty money that link the sort of Kremlin to the UK, and who are the enablers, who are the British enablers who are facilitating that. So I think two things need to happen here in the UK. The first is that, or three things rather. The first thing is that there are a number of laws that are on the table that the government needs to implement very rapidly. So those are around kind of identifying who owns what, basically here. The second thing is the British government needs to put resources into the enforcement agencies So there's the National Crime Agency, there's the Syrian Fraud Office. I mean, those are woefully underfunded. There's no political backing whatsoever. And only once those things have been done can we make any headway whatsoever.
Franz Wild is editor at the Bureau of Investigative Journalism. I'm very grateful to you for joining me here on Times Radio.